disrupted.
America that I thought weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. Hope you're having a fantastic day so far. So Joe Biden obviously is a NATO ally. He's definitely a supporter and staunch on preserving the alliance of NATO. That's one of the reasons why him and the rest of the establishment, Nikki Haley, they're all, compiling together to, preserve the democratic hopefulness of a NATO alliance. And that's what, Trump is going to threaten, and Trump's going to ruin the, devastation of NATO alliances. But the funniest thing is, not a lot of people know why we're still in a NATO alliance and what NATO really does out in the open. To the point where even Noam Chomsky even asked that in a lecture hall. He said, "Why do we have NATO if the Soviet Union, dispersed and we don't have a threat of communism anymore? Why exactly is NATO still around? Why exactly is this formation still a part of the general global geopolitical society?" And that's when RFK Jr. steps in on this. RFK Jr., who went on to a podcast show, because this is stuff you can't say on television, folks. RFK Jr. went on to this podcast show, and he's going to explain to you exactly what NATO is. And NATO, really deep down, is a money laundering scheme. Much like other NGOs, much like other global compliant alliances with the military and so on and so forth. It's just a tactic. It's all just a money laundering scheme to preserve the dominant force to control countries. And you'll see why and how impactful this is, and actually how being a NATO ally is threatening our national security. Take a listen to this.
When we bring a new nation into NATO, then the first part of that contract is that new nation has to conform its weapons purchases to NATO specifications, which means they have to buy their weapons from Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing.
That's clever.
And all of those companies are owned by BlackRock. And BlackRock is, the big
So they're
donor.
incentivized to expand NATO because the only way that they can increase their profits if they get more countries that have signed up.
Well, it's a whole market that they now have a trap market. They can only buy from them.
It's like Starbucks selling Frappuccinos. It's like you want Starbucks everywhere. And oh my God.
Every coffee shop should be a Starbucks.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then how do we break into a new market?
There's also, it's a confluence of ideological and economic incentives. If you look at what's happening on Wall Street, they're no longer going factory by factory and saying what's the production, what's the efficiency, what's the lowest cost, what's the future. They're all focusing on what is the Fed going to do this week.
That's impressive. That's impressive to say that on a podcast show hosted by, I believe that's a comedian. I've seen him before. I don't know his name, but I think that's a comedian. And it's exactly like he's definitely hit the nail on the head on what NATO is. It's basically it's no complicated measure. It's no rocket science to figure out that NATO is a money trap, a laundering system for the military contractors, and the fact that NATO is basically this mafia to help, military contractors blackmail other countries. And this is, there was an article back in 2018, I do believe, 2018 or 2019, that we showed on this show of NATO countries like here in Canada, the United States, European nations, and other NATO allies that were threatened by NATO. They were getting blackmailed by NATO, saying that if you don't raise your GDP on defense measures, meaning that if you don't spend a certain more of your budget on military purchases like Northrop Grumman and General Dynamics and Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, if you don't put your money to these military contractors, we are going to mess you up. That's what NATO has said to its allies. They threaten countries that take part of it to say, if you don't spend your GDP on these corporations, if you don't put your production do mass warfare ammo and munitions, if you don't put your money towards that, we are going to do something to you. That's what NATO says to other countries. And now you understand this whole entire system. Now you know exactly why NATO is taking part in the Ukraine war. Why this war even started was that NATO wanted to expand into that territory. They want to remove that buffer zone between NATO-aligned countries and Russia. And they wanted to get rid of it. They wanted to get rid of it, so they ignored their own peace treaties. They ignored plans that detailed out that they could not cross, into the eastern territories, and they did. And they want Ukraine to be part of a NATO ally. Why? So that they can push more militarized warfare against a country like Russia, because they want to dominate over that other superpower, which is Russia. They want to create another Cold War because it's more incentive for their business market. They have a whole economic system. So, of course, they're going to take as many countries and alliances as possible, take all that money, extract from other nations, and put that into military regime operations, munitions, weaponry, ammunition, like all this gathered together to formulate this kind of coalition to create warfare. So this is definitely on point and stuff you would never hear on television being told about this. We kind of had, hints about it. They kind of, not directly said this, but we've had moments where, like CNN, for example, Wolf Blitzer famously said that, if we stop, the war, the regime change wars, what about the jobs? What about all the factory workers that are making, atomic bombs that are going to be threatening into other nations? What about those people? Like, you've heard those takes before, but this is something else. This is something else. And you're hearing this on a comedian's podcast. I just wish I knew that guy's name. Someone look it up. His name is Schultz. I'll have to check on that later. If anyone's watching this right now, go look it up. I don't know. I've seen this guy before. I just don't remember his name off the top of my head. But that, to say that on a comedian's podcast, that's amazing. And like I said, no one really knows why we're still part of NATO. I feel like we shouldn't be part of NATO. And I feel like if more people understood why we're part of NATO, then yeah, we definitely need to get out of it because it's a threat to national security. I mean, why would you have a global conglomeracy of corporations and geopowers threatening ourselves, that if we don't spend our economics and put our GDP, put ourselves at risk by producing more warfare, that we might get the war, that NATO's threatening us? That is a national security threat. You would think that we'd take that in and go, well, that's it. We're not dealing with this. But Joe Biden, the Democrats, the GOP, the establishment politicians, they're all for this. They're all for this because they get kickbacks, they get incentives for this. The whole economic process that they can, cultivize in, they can capitalize off it. So they don't care. They don't care. That's why they're doing everything they can. We got to preserve NATO. We got to preserve our alliances because our alliances are helpful. They don't ever tell you why. How are they helpful? How is NATO helpful in your life? If NATO actually gave a damn about defending, say, America, for example, would there not be NATO mercenaries lying themselves across the border right now with the amount of people that are pouring in? Would that not be a defense motive? But they don't do that. They don't do that because there's nothing defensive about it. It's all a money laundering scheme, just like RFK Jr. has pointed it out, obviously.